What's up, guys? Welcome to the Son of Wonder. Today we'll be reviewing Andor Season 1, Episode 4. So let's conversationalize. Alright, guys, so it feels really good to be back at my actual humble abode and doing these videos for you where I can have all my sabers and do my setups and stuff and not in a cramped hotel bathroom, forcing you guys to view my videos via a not great picture, but we're back now, so praise the Lord. But this episode 4, I enjoyed a ton more than the previous 3. As you could probably tell in my last review of the episode 2 and 3 together, and just the series as a whole, I was kind of meh on it. It didn't really feel like Star Wars to me. It felt like I said, Tron, Mad Max, Blade Runner in space. But this episode had a lot more Star Wars vibes, mainly just because it had the most, familiar, hey, look, there's that thing, or hey, look, there's that character. And so that did help a lot, and just, hey, this is a Star Wars show, and it helped a lot in convincing me of that. Also, there are tons of these little details in this show that, as a hardcore Star Wars fan, I was thrilled to both see and hear, and I will be breaking those down for you guys, because, wow, there are some pretty cool Easter eggs. But let's dive right into it. So the opening of this episode is Andor, and who I now know is Stellan Skarsgård's character's name as Luthen, so I don't have to keep calling him Stellan Skarsgård's character anymore, so that's nice. So his name is Luthen, so Andor and Luthen are escaping on Luthen's ship from the ending of episode 3 that we just saw, all that intensity. I like how they decided to ride that, and it didn't just skip ahead like some shows do to a later point in time where you don't really know how this person got to this place, or how the events played out. I just like how it's just immediate. They're on the ship, they're still leaving, they went out in hyperspace. Awesome. One thing that confused me a little bit was how Andor was surprised that he seemed to be surprised that his ship had a hyperdrive. It didn't seem that, I didn't really notice anything that the ship did that wasn't any crazier than other ships when they go into hyperspace. He just said, hey, plug in the coordinates, and then bam, it went into hyperspace. I don't know if there was a specific thing that I missed or whatever. That was a little weird to me. But anyway, we get into this pretty good conversation between Luthen and Andor. We get a little bit more of Andor's past. We get more insight as to what Luthen's plans are for Andor, and we see Luthen once again trying to convince Andor to join his side and giving all these reasons and motivations why he should. And through that, like I said, we get a little bit more about Andor's past. And at first, Andor mentions that he fought on Mimban. It is a planet that I'm pretty sure was featured in Solo: A Star Wars Story at the beginning, where Han Solo is in the Imperial garb, fighting with the soldiers on the side of the Empire and the Mud Planet. And so Andor says he fought on that world in that war, and I really couldn't tell if which is kind of a major thing, if he was saying that I had to fight on the Empire's side. I assume he meant on the side of the people rebelling against the Empire, based on dialogue later, but I'm not really clear on that. I think it was the people rebelling against the Empire, but I'm not sure. Anyway, Andor says he fought there for 2 years after just getting out of jail when he was 16. But then Luthen reveals that he apparently knows so much about him to the point that he knows that Andor apparently I guess was lying, because Luthen says that Andor actually fought on the ground in Mimban was only on the ground for 6 months, and apparently he didn't even fight. Apparently he came in as a cook. And the whole motivation or point of that conversation was kind of just to bring home the fact that Andor has really just been running his whole life from the Empire. He's not really been fighting. Even Luthen said, you lived because you ran, because Andor makes the point that you should just live. Why do we need to fight the Empire? It's clear that his motivation and his mindset, he does not think that any of the rebel cells or all the people trying to fight against the Empire like Luthen are doing any good. He doesn't think that there's any point in risking everybody's lives to fight for this big, massive cause when the Empire is so large, and he just feels like they end up fighting them. The rebels just end up fighting themselves rather than the actual enemy. And Luthen agrees to some extent, but he uses that as a motivation to just hate the Empire more, as a tactic that they use. Like, the Empire tries to get the rebels to fight against each other more. So I thought all that stuff was very interesting. Also, when Andor kind of says, like, I wondered who you were, I thought you may have been, and then Luthen asks him, like, who do you think I am? And Andor's like, well, you may have been like an alliance, a sep, a guerrilla, and then he says partisan front. And I was trying to look up what partisan front was. I believe that is the rebel cell that Saw Gerrera leads, which we get a shout out of Saw Gerrera later in the episode. Somebody mentions his name, and I thought that was pretty cool, but I'm pretty sure that's what partisan front is. One thing that also intrigued and confused me was Andor mentions alliance and sep, and sep, at least as my understanding of Star Wars, usually means separatists, but the separatists are clearly gone at this point in the Star Wars timeline. This is 5 BBY, and the separatists were only prominent during the Clone Wars, which was, I believe, 19 BBY? Yes, I believe it was 19 BBY when the Clone Wars ended and when Revenge of the Sith took place. Before the Battle of Yavin is what BBY stands for, which took place in Episode 4, New Hope. That's where Luke, fires the proton torpedo on the Death Star and blows it up. Anyway, so it's weird to me that he would have thought he was a sep or a separatist. Maybe in that day and age it also meant like being a rebel or not, going along with the Empire's cause or whatever, or not cause, but terrorism or tyrannicalness, I guess. And then he also mentions alliance before that, and I don't believe the Rebel alliance is formed at this point either. I mean, it's kind of established in this episode that they're just these small individual cells, just like it was established in Star Wars Rebels, which that will come up later. Star Wars Rebels will. But yeah, so all of those things are established, but they're not an alliance yet. Mon Mothma hasn't allied everybody. She does, like, spoiler alert, she does that in Star Wars Rebels. And that is the interesting part. Like I said in one of my earlier reviews about Andor, is that it's interesting to have another show that explores the origins of the rebellion when we already had a show that explained the origins of the rebellion pretty well in Star Wars Rebels. So, I think it's good it's cool to have multiple perspectives, so long as they don't contradict anything that Rebels established. And so far, I don't think they have. Anyway, it's just weird that he would say Alliance and SEP when neither of those organizations, either one has come and gone or one hasn't even happened yet. Also, the Separatists were known as the Separatist Alliance. So it's just, I don't know, it would be weird to say Separatists then Separatists, like Alliance if you meant the Separatists and then say SEP. I don't know. That whole thing is kind of confusing. That was interesting to why I didn't exactly know why he said that. But anyway, that was his argument, is that essentially all the rebels are the same and they're all just going to lose because he thinks it's all useless. But, Luthen again makes the case of, like, you just rather, like, what is stealing stuff from the Empire and what is, just act like he says, spit in their food, as Andor put it earlier. Just the general idea that apparently the Empire is just so arrogant, which we know this, but the Empire is so arrogant that they are blind to anybody who's just walking in and doing whatever they want. But Luthen's point is that Luthen believes that Andor actually deep inside wants to do something about it, despite what Andor says on the outside. Luthen mentions this very hardcore mission. The mission is robbing an entire Imperial sector of their quarterly payroll, which, I mean, for a whole sector, which I'm pretty sure covers at least one system, maybe more, that's a lot of credits. That is a lot of credits. So that's a huge undertaking, huge job. At least as near as I can understand. It may not be as big as I think it is, but I mean, that's a lot of credits, at least as I'm understanding it. What's interesting, though, is that, Luthen says they're robbing all this money, and then Luthen says he'll give Andor 200,000 credits to do it. Which I'm like, if that's a lot of money to rob from the Empire, why don't you just give him a larger share of that money? I don't really know how that's all working. But anyway, Andor agrees. And more importantly, he shaves later. So this is the first time we've seen Diego Luna as Andor clean shaven, which I think is an interesting look for them. I think it's a cool look. But I think he also looks more like gruff with the beard. So I like both looks. But so after the scene where Andor agrees to Luthen's mission, we cut to Coruscant, finally. And I'm pretty sure this is the first time in... I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time in live action since Revenge of the Sith that we have seen Coruscant. You can correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments below, but I'm pretty sure this is the first time. And it's funny because when the camera pans over the city, it looks like an actual city. Like, there's one building that, like, is that the Empire State Building? Like, it looks very similar. And I would have to just rewatch, like look at again the Coruscant buildings from the prequels and stuff to see if it's consistent. But it almost looked like too real. Like, they were, like, overly trying to, emphasize, like make it look too much like an actual city on Earth. But, I mean, it could be consistent with the previous movies, and I just didn't notice that right off. But anyway, they go to the Imperial Security Bureau, the headquarters of that specific branch of the Empire. And I am familiar with this bureau. I'm familiar with this organization because it's established in Star Wars Rebels. The character Agent Callus works for the Imperial Security Bureau. They are essentially, at least as I understand them, a bureau specifically tasked with monitoring insurgencies around the galaxy, rebel insurgencies. Some ISB agents deal with it hands-on, like Agent Callus did in Rebels. Some kind of just do it from afar. But they are definitely, they're kind of a harder branch of the Empire. They have more hands-on experience with that kind of stuff than, I guess, just your average stormtrooper or Imperial officer. But what's interesting is that, they have this council meeting, and this, again, another eager overzealous Imperial officer girl. They have this council meeting, very similar to the one in A New Hope that Vader was in, where he says, "I find your lack of faith disturbing," and chokes the one guy. But yeah, it's very similar to that. It's like an all-white room, so it's very interesting aesthetic. And the leader guy is kind of just asking everybody about, like, their status on different things, and he's insulting people because he's an Imperial and whatnot. All Imperials are jerks. And they go over what happened on Ferrix, the planet where all the stuff with Andor went down, and, like, the speeder blew up, and all that stuff. The planet that we spent most of the 3 previous episodes on. And they're going over what happened with all that, and why corporate security, the one place with the whiny younger Imperial guy was there, and the Irish corporate security guy. They're discussing that situation, how some of the corporate security guys were killed. I believe they say 4 were killed later in the episode. They're reviewing that situation, and they mentioned the stolen cube thing that Andor was going to sell to Luthen in the 3rd episode, which I still am not sure. I think the way they described it in the previous episodes was it's like a device that can pinpoint the location of certain Imperials at any given at a given sector or a given parsec. I don't know, range. It's a complicated device, but. Anyway, it's a cube. We'll just call it the cube for now, like in Transformers or in Avengers or in any pop culture thing that has a cube, which I think is a lot. But anyway, that sparks the girl's interest because apparently the sector that she's in charge of, that cube was stolen from her sector, so she's mad about that and wants to get it back. But it's funny because earlier, like, the main leader guy of the council that I mentioned before, he was kind of saying how the ISB was more of like a response to diseases, like their doctors, their medical staff or whatever, trying to prevent diseases from spreading throughout the galaxy. And he says, and he makes a valid argument that the longer more time they take to identify the cause of the disease or what the disease is, the more effort and longer it'll take to cure it. So clearly he's referring to just the different rebel cells sprouting throughout the galaxy. But I think the point he's trying to make is like their job is just to do that and not really like go overboard with it, like not send a ton of troops, not devote a bunch of resources to doing to investigating these certain things, and because she really wants to investigate, like see where where these specific little rebels are going and whatnot that stole the cube, which are of course Andor and Luthen. But the boss guy just sees them as very small threats, even though they're actually very big threats. And he just is like, we don't need to deal with that kind of stuff. We don't need to deal with these small robberies. We just need to focus on the actual insurgencies across the galaxy, the actual ones that seem to be a threat, and stamp those out. But we don't need to devote a ton of resources to the small stuff. And it's always ironic because so much of the bad guys and just pop culture in general, it's the small stuff that ends up getting them. So it's one of those classic cliches, I guess. And anyway, he'll regret that eventually. He'll regret not trying to find him. But anyway, you have that scene, and I like how I like the world building in this episode especially. Before it was like they weren't really doing much. It was just located on that one planet that Andor was at, and he just owed a ton of people money and just all that stuff. But this episode we get a more branching out of like the wider galaxy, what's going on in different sectors and whatnot. There's even one mention like at the very end of that scene at the council room where the guy says they're bringing more construction equipment to Scarif. Like one of the other officer dudes says that, and I was like, oh, that's clearly a nod to like their construction equipment because they're currently finishing the Death Star or building. I guess still building the Death Star, but they should be close to finishing since it's only 5 years before the Death Star fully emerges in A New Hope and Rogue One, because Rogue One takes place literally right before A New Hope. But anyway, so I did think that nod was really cool. So just again, those little details, like, and there's more of them. We'll get to that, but I mean, just so cool. So moving on, we find Luthen and Andor at the planet known as Aldhani. That is actually the title of this episode, is the name of this planet. And it is where, I assume at least the next episode will take place, and it is the main place that Andor spends his time on. And I actually really like this planet. I like the mountainous regions, but it's still like got grass and all that. Very like place you might find in like Great Britain or whatever. I thought the region was really cool, and you can tell that they actually like filmed it. I think that looks like a real mountain. Like doesn't seem like there could be any special effects there. Like that is an actual mountain that they actually took actors to film on that mountain. And in a day and age where there's so much blue screen and green screen and CGI, and it's nice to just get out and like film in like these real places and whatnot. So I did think seeing that was really cool. Luthen and Andor just have their Luthen's ship has landed on the planet, and Luthen doesn't want, I guess just doesn't want Cassian to use his real name, so he's like, just pick a name, and then Andor's like, okay, I'll just call myself Clem, which I did think of all the names was an interesting name to pick, but Andor wants to be Clem for a little bit, and so Luthen's like, okay, cool, for the next 5 days you get to be Clem, and I guess that's just to make sure that Andor's identity is protected and kept from the Empire in any sort of way, because he's wanted by the Empire, and Luthen really has faith in this guy, and like he thinks Andor could become a very big deal, which he obviously eventually does. We learned that there's a team of people that I guess Luthen has helped build here on this planet, like a team of a small group of rebels, I guess, rebels before they were rebels. You have the leader of the group, this woman coming down from the mountain, and Luthen's like, oh man, she's in charge, and she's not gonna be happy with you, you coming in at the last minute to be a part of the group. Which I didn't really understand that whole conflict. I didn't get. I guess I understood the whole like, man, this is so last minute. Why did you want to add this new guy in so late in the game? But I didn't understand why it was such to the extent that it was. Like she was like really mad that Luthen wanted to add Andor to the crew. And so was everybody else when Andor and the girl got there. So that was a little like, I didn't really understand that reaction, but I guess, when you're forming this heavy and complicated plan to rob this, facility, which turns out to be a garrison full of weapons and ships and all kinds of Imperial horrors, especially when you're only a crew of 7, it is kind of, or I guess 6 at the time, before Andor was added on, I guess it is a little like, we don't need any last-minute changes to the plan when we got something good going already. So I guess I can understand them being that mad when they're in an actual military situation. And I like the show in that sense that it does, I think this episode executed the real world but still Star Wars feel better than the previous 3 did. The previous 3, they kind of sacrificed Star Wars for real world, and this episode felt a lot more of a balance. Like, hey, we get some Star Wars in there, but we also have very real stuff, and a lot of this stuff can actually happen and has happened, and these feel like real people who would, who are helping and all that. So I did really enjoy that. Another reason I like this episode far better than the previous ones. But anyway, Luthen gets the girl to agree with, bringing Andor on the team. And he kind of gets a little upset at her. Like, he kind of yells at her at one point, and I was like, dang, like, Luthen's got some serious grit to him. And also there was, like, a line where he was like, the girl said to him, she's like, well, what if Andor's a problem? What if we need to deal with him in some way? Like, I don't know how, I guess, if he, like, wouldn't be listening or whatever. And then Luthen's like, well, that's the part about, like, renting a guy is you can, they're disposable. Which I didn't really like that line. Like, I wasn't sure if he was actually being like, oh, is Luthen actually kind of just turncoating on Andor? Like, willing to just throw him out if he does the wrong thing? Or maybe, I would like to believe more that Luthen was just saying that to get her to comply. Because it seems like Luthen spent way too much effort to just get Andor just to say, oh, well, he's expendable. We can just throw him out if he starts causing any trouble. Like, I have a feeling that was just, him just kind of just saying that to her so she would agree to letting Andor join the team, or letting Clem join the team. But a little before that, we have this very interesting moment where Luthen gives Andor this crystal necklace that Luthen has, as he says it's as a down payment, before they actually have the mission where he gives them the full payment by the end of it. But it's a fairly large crystal, much larger than normal kyber crystals, but he does in fact say that it is, he refers to it as multiple names. I think of the first one is Kuwati Signet, or Kuwati Signet or something like that. I wasn't really sure what that was, apparently maybe like a title of the mineral maybe. And then he called it Sky Stone, I believe. And then Blue Kyber was the other name. So clearly it is at least a variant of a kyber crystal, and likely could power a lightsaber if it was given the choice. And I have a feeling it probably is also attuned with the Force, because I just take it as all kyber crystals have to have at least some level of power to be able to connect with the Force and have the Force inside of the crystals. But I just thought it was awesome that, hey, we're getting a kyber crystal. And it was funny because there were so many moments in this episode where it was like, They say that this was not going to be a fan service type show, and I mean, yeah, I guess it's not. I guess this episode, it definitely wasn't in terms of like, hey, there's 3PO or hey, there's Ahsoka. Like, we don't get any of those cameos other than people we know who were going to be in the show, like Mon Mothma. But it is kind of funny, like they were dropping some pretty heavy Easter eggs, and like another one that was a pretty big name drop to be an actual Star Wars show was he called the crystal that he gave Andor, the kyber crystal, he called it, he referred to, I don't know if he referred to it as the ancient world, or he was just saying that it's from the ancient world, which that's a very interesting idea. Like them calling what happened in the old days the ancient world. I wonder if he was possibly referring to the Old Republic, which would be very likely because he says that the necklace crystal was like an object meant to commemorate the uprising against the Rakatan invaders. I think that's very interesting because a lot of you might not know who the Rakatans are, but in Legends, the Rakatans were this amphibious species who were, humanoids as well. So they had like human bodies, but kind of like an amphibious head to them. So definitely aliens. But they were evil, very evil race, and they're prominent in the Knights of the Old Republic video game. You learn a lot about them in that game. Everybody loves that game. It is held to such high acclaim. But you learn a lot about them in that game. But they're essentially this race who use the dark side of the Force to power their technology, and use like the Force, the power of the dark side, in conjunction with like technology to conquer the galaxy. I mean, they had an empire. They were essentially the empire before the empire. Or at least one of them. I mean, there were like a ton of different, people trying to take over the galaxy in the days of the Old Republic, before the times of the Clone Wars, and I guess in the canon, what they now call the High Republic. But, so that name drop was pretty significant for me, because I didn't even know they canonized the Rakatan until I looked it up before I did this video. Apparently they had mentioned it in a book or comic or something, but to actually have a name drop in a show, in a live-action show, is pretty significant. So I thought that detail was pretty great. I love it when they acknowledge legend stuff. And Luthen also says, like, to Andor, like, if I'm not able to give them money to you or whatever, like, just sell the crystal. Don't take less than 50,000 for it. So clearly it's like insanely expensive. But Luthen also says it has a very great importance to him. So that's interesting. I do wonder if like Luthen doesn't have any personal connections to the past of the crystal, or like, I would love to know like the more of a history there, because that all sounds very intriguing to me. Definitely, this episode definitely was the opposite of the previous three, in the sense of like previous three, except for the third one, which all the tension building, but definitely the first two was kind of boring. Like there wasn't a lot going on. There wasn't a lot I was interested in. But this episode had all sorts of stuff that I was like, oh. So we'll get to more of those later. But anyway, Andor ends up going up the mountain with the girl because she agreed to take him with her. And they're talking about Luthen, and the girl mentions how, like, we don't talk about Luthen. Like, we don't act like he's... Like, we act like he doesn't exist. Like, he's one of the secret guys, I guess, just forming these different missions and like groups to take little hits at the Empire here and there, and sometimes big hits like this mission that they're doing. But clearly Luthen is like the informant. Like, he's not in charge of the operation. Technically she is, but he is in charge of, like, putting the operation together, and like he's seeing how all the pieces fit together and whatnot. He's responsible for putting the pieces in place. So he definitely has some great influence in a bunch of different places. Meanwhile, corporate security, the guys from the first three episodes, are getting reprimanded by the Imperial Security Bureau for, like, the old guy in the first episode for neglecting the fact that the two guys are murdered. Like, his neglect caused the whiny guy and the Irish guy to act on the planet that Andor was on, which ended up causing that whole commotion and the explosion and killing all those guys. And so he was held as partially responsible, even though he didn't think he was. And I was disappointed that we didn't get, like, really anything from the Irish guy. Like, I liked his character in the previous episodes. I thought he had a good, like, there was good motivation. There was a good personality there. There was a good vigor to his character, much more so than the wimpy guy. Like, they were very much two opposites. Like, they were both zealous for their jobs, but, like, one was a lot more, let's go about it, and the other one was, like, a lot more timid and cowardly. But they ended up focusing on the timid and cowardly one in this episode, not to a great extent, but to a little bit. Like, they show him getting off the docking port, which looks strikingly like an actual Earth airport. That was another thing that I was like, I've seen docking ports in Star Wars before, and they look a lot more Star Wars, but the one that he docked on, whatever planet it was, I guess I don't know if it was Coruscant or what, but it just looked way too much like a spiffy version of an Earth airport. Even the apartments that he goes to see his mom later are kind of like spiffy apartments. Like there's not really something distinctly Star Wars about them. So I was a little, disappointed there. He goes to see his mom, and I guess been essentially fired from his job. The ISB agent guy who was reprimanding them all said that the Empire will be taking over the jobs of the corporate security guys in the Morlana system, which it was funny because the whole time in the first 3 episodes I thought that the corporate security was just like a smaller branch or like subsect of the Empire, like they were all Imperial. And I guess to some extent I was right in the sense that they're working for the Empire, but they're apparently not actually Imperial, because the ISB guy says that they're going to be enforcing like actual Imperial authority in the Morlana system instead of just having the corporate society run the joint. So joint being sector, and so I did think that was interesting to learn. But yeah, the whiny guy's back hanging out with his mom now, I guess. It was kind of funny because like he has that scene where he walks in, but they don't really do anything with it later in the episode. Clearly he's going to come back. I don't really know why they would have that scene with him if the character wasn't meant for more later in the series. I don't know how he's going to factor in if he's fired. I don't see a ton of ways that they would have to like rehire him or bring him back in the fold. Maybe he like knows something that the Imperials need him for, or maybe somebody suggests him. They realize that he has great enthusiasm for rules that he thinks are right, and so maybe that's the quick case. I don't really know. But anyway, we find Luthen heading to Coruscant in his ship, and this was a very interesting scene because he kind of goes into one of the parts of his ship as the autopilot is on, the artificial intelligence or whatever is flying the ship and trying to land on Coruscant, and he's got all I guess this styling, like I don't know if it's like a makeup kit or what, but it's just something to change his look. Like he's got a wig and like this towel, like he'd like to clean his face. He like completely redresses himself and like makes him look like this unassuming flamboyant art collector, or not art collector, but like collector of just general items throughout the galaxy. One of my favorite moments of this scene was like not only does he change his look, but you see him, he's like starting to like smile and like kind of put on the facade. He's like kind of practicing. He doesn't even have a mirror, but he's kind of just practicing like feeling the personality to just kind of hone in to trick everybody. And I really those kind of details are actually really cool. I really enjoy those kind of things. Those like because that's something that like you would actually have to do. Like if you were faking for like whoever comes into your shop that you're just this unassuming dude who there's nothing shady going on in my business or what I'm doing or whatever, and like you would probably have to practice. You would have to like practice having a personality that's completely opposite from your actual real personality, which the one he's using definitely is. And so just that those little details here and there, it's like he's just smiling and all that, even though he's just like this really gruff, gritty like rebel. He has to come off as this flamboyant collector just to fool everybody and not looking deeper into what he's actually doing. So I really enjoyed that detail. But anyway, he has this assistant who I guess knows that he's really a rebel, and she tells him that Mon Mothma has arrived at Senator Mon Mothma has arrived at his Den of Antiquities establishment. So like he's masquerading as a collector who sells unique items. And at first I wasn't really sure what they were doing. They made it a point to like point out like a new driver that Mon Mothma has, and then when I was kind of realizing more like, oh, the assistant girl is trying to distract the new driver. And then once Luthen leads Mon Mothma into the back room to actually talk with her for real, because apparently Mon Mothma knows that Luthen is just this is all facade and that he's really a rebel. And they're part of what Luthen calls the Circle, which I guess is an inner circle of politicians or whatever in the different people of high status in Coruscant who are all secretly against the Empire, but clearly the other politicians, like the Imperial politicians, don't know that. But that was an interesting idea because I have a feeling that's probably all the conspiracy theories about real world events. Like that's very much what that seems like. The inner circle of politicians who's you know, secretly against this one thing, but they act like they're not or whatever. Which Mon Mothma really doesn't act like. She's like devout against the crap of the Empire. But yeah, like a circle of different people who don't like the Empire. Before that, like Luthen's Den of Antiquities, like all the stuff he has in his place, there's a lot of Easter eggs. One of them being, I freaked out at a couple of them. One of them, they start off as a small one, I believe, is a Wookie helmet. A similar one that we see one of the Wookiees wearing on Kashyyyk in Revenge of the Sith, which I thought was a really cool detail. The weapon, I don't know if it's called like a conjul or whatever, I forget what he calls it. Very distinct looking weapon that he offers to Mon Mothma to give to her, for her to give to her husband as a present, because she's looking for her husband a present. Or I guess that was more like the cover for it. I mean, I guess she was there for that and to talk with Luthen about, you know, rebel stuff. But anyway, the weapon that Luthen offers is from Utapau, which is the place where General Grievous fought Obi-Wan and Revenge of the Sith when they had their lightsaber duel and all the clones and Commander Cody stormed the droids and all that area inside of the pits and whatnot. Really cool planet, and I think it's a really cool detail that they that weapon came specifically from Utapau. That is by far not the coolest detail in the room. There is another scene where you see when Luthen's assistant girl is like trying to distract the new driver guy with one of their other rare unique items. You see these stones on one of the shelves, and the stones, if you have watched Star Wars Rebels, as I've mentioned the show many times at this point, but those stones have these, I guess, hieroglyphics, if you will, on them, of a closed hand, one of a closed hand, one of an open hand, and one of like a hand like this. And I am very familiar with what that means in Star Wars Rebels. Spoilers for Season 4. There is a whole arc where the main character, Ezra Bridger, is trying to discover more secrets about the Jedi Temple on the planet that he's on, which is Lothal. And there's a giant painting or mural at the base of the temple, and it is a depiction of what is the beings known as Star Wars that were introduced in the Clone Wars, known as the Father, the Son, and the Daughter. There were these stones that depicted the way their hands were on the mural, and these hand positions were important because through the use of the Force, Ezra was able to unlock the gateway to what was known as the World Between Worlds. And the fact that Luthen just has these stones aren't this ones specifically like on the mural that Ezra used to unlock the gate, but Ezra had one of these stones as a reference point to help find the mural on the temple to unlock the gate. But these stones, or at least I don't know if were made or whatever, but these stones are in this guy's collection. And to me that's a very deliberate thing to do because, you know, not everybody has watched Star Wars Rebels, but still they clearly felt the need, especially for a show who doesn't seem so concerned in fan service, they clearly felt the need to put that on the shelf, and they obviously you know, had to have known what it was. So it's very interesting to me that they would even think to put that detail in there. I don't know if it's going to come up later, but it's also weird that this, you know, this rebel guy would just happen to have one of the most sacred and meaningful symbols of the Force and the Jedi. That probably could have some major implications. I love that so much. But there was another detail that I don't think made me freak out almost equally. As I looked at it more, like maybe not as much because it wasn't as on the nose as I thought it was, but still it was kind of telling. There's one piece of armor on one of his displays that looks very much like Mandalorian armor, or at least a Mandalorian chest plate. But there is another actual full suit of armor he has displayed, and it is incredibly similar to the Dark Lord Sith look for Starkiller in the Force Unleashed video game. The Force Unleashed is a game that I have been playing since I was 5. Then on the Wii, and then over different consoles over over my life, and I have loved that game always. It has always remained one of my favorite video games of all time. It is about Darth Vader's secret apprentice. Spoiler alert for the ending of that game story. At the ending of that game, there's a choice where you can either choose the dark side. If you fight Darth Vader and destroy Vader, because he betrayed you, or you fight Darth Sidious and destroy Sidious. If you choose the dark side and fight Vader, you end up killing him, but then you fight Sidious, and then he betrays you and all that, and then you end up kind of just scarred and beaten like Vader was, and you end up wearing this new armor. That armor is called the Sith Stalker Armor, but there's an addition to the Force Unleashed game where you end up wearing this new armor to go to Hoth to find Luke and fight him in this alternate reality of Star Wars, I guess. The one where Vader dies early and then Starkiller becomes the new Darth Vader. Bottom line is that armor, at least the helmet, is almost identical to the Dark Lord Starkiller Sith outfit from the game that Luthen has on display. The rest of the armor itself looks very there's one part right here, shoulder thing, that looks similar to something that Captain Rex wears, the clone Captain Rex wears in Clone Wars. And then the rest of the armor kind of has this Japanese feel to it. But the helmet specifically, save these things that are sticking out, looks, again, identical to the Starkiller thing. There was some stuff in Obi-Wan Kenobi that kind of alluded to, is that... Are we getting some Starkiller hints or whatnot? And let me just tell you, if they're bringing Starkiller to the canon in any way, I will lose my mind. I will scream for you guys. I might audibly yell and scream in y'all's faces if that happens. One other YouTuber had a theory that, or at least brought up a potential idea that the new Inquisitor that was advertised in the Tales of the Jedi trailer could be a variant of a Starkiller, the Starkiller reimagined for the canon as an Inquisitor, which is, funnily enough, I had heard something a long time ago that Dave Filoni had wanted to do that for Rebels. He wanted to reconvert Starkiller into an Inquisitor for that show, but they ended up not doing it. But I do wonder if all the some of the different hints and stuff, and I do wonder if they're not pointing to a potential Starkiller foreshadowing. So it's kind of funny, and a series that I was worried wasn't gonna really, after the first 3 episodes, I was I don't know if this series is gonna be much worth anything. In this one episode alone, they have proven me wrong, because they had 2 insane Easter eggs that alluded to major things and things that they could have come up later that were already really important or hadn't even come up in canon yet in this episode in the Star Wars universe. So that's awesome. But this lightsaber was actually a toy Starkiller lightsaber that came out, I believe, in 2007. I think 2007 or 2008. That's pretty cool. It has spikes. Anyway, very loud. I'm a lightsaber collector, so I figured it would be appropriate to have this Starkiller lightsaber on the table for, that amazing reveal or whatever that was. I really needed to be a reveal of some sort. But anyway, continuing with the actual story, Luthen and Mon Mothma talk in the back room while the new driver is not, is preoccupied with whatever the assistant lady is showing him, because the new driver is clearly a Imperial spy. Because Mon Mothma says to Luthen, there's spies everywhere. Every day I go to the bank, I see new faces. And just those little details help contextualize or just kind of ground the world more. And I really enjoy things like that. She didn't just say man, there's spies everywhere. No, she kind of elaborates there's spies at the bank. They're just watching me wherever I go. That does feel a little bit more real world while still keeping within the themes of Star Wars. And that was what I appreciated. Luthen discusses with her at first, if Mon Mothma can keep funding his, missions and the stuff he's trying to set up. But she's saying it's not as easy for her now because of all the spies, and she has to be far more careful. Mon Mothma says that she's actually the one who's most at risk, because, if they discover anything about the operation, just apparently she would be the first person to fall, and, she would be the first person to be found out, I guess, because of all the connections she's had with Luthen and giving him the money to fund all of these rebel operations. And Luthen's just I need to know if you can keep funding me so I can plan for if you can't. So he's clearly very much a pre-planner guy. Like if one, and that was established in the third episode when even when he put the charges on the door before the corporate security guys came in, because I mean he clearly has like, okay, if this doesn't work, I can plan for this before this happening, and he's got very much a Batman mindset of like in the Star Wars universe. He's got that similar strategic, street smart brain, which I think that kind of character for Star Wars is really cool. I really dig Luthen as a character. I dig a lot of things about him. I dig how gritty he is and gruff he is. I think Stellan Skarsgård was perfectly cast as this guy. He made the show far more interesting. When he got on the scene in the third episode, like officially got on the scene, I was like, hey, this show just got 1,000 times better. And that through line has fortunately continued in this episode, which I am very glad for, because I really like his character, and I like his type of character. Like, you know, putting on a smile for like one group while doing the other stuff, like the rebel stuff for another group, and he's just like secretly he's like a bad guy, like, you know, bad in like a cool sense. But he can't let anybody know that except the people who are supposed to. And so I really like that kind of character. But she says she wants to add someone else into their circle, like I mentioned before, and he's completely against it. And once they kind of realize that they just need to wrap it up and, like, you know, keep the facade going to where, you know, Luthen offers her a stone mural thing of like a sun goddess or whatever, I forget what he called it, as a gift for her husband. They have this really cool moment where they're going outside, they're keeping the facade up, but, you know, Luthen says this very specific thing to her, and like as if he's saying it about the object that he's given her to give to her husband, but he's actually saying it about the choice she's about to make to bring somebody else inside their inner circle. He's like, I forget what he says. It's something to the effect of, just be really careful before you make the choice you're about to, and like be careful that you can reverse it, or something to that effect. But like it was just a really cool way of like saying one thing but meaning another, and like it was a neat thing like that to fool the Imperial spy driver guy. That rhymed. But anyway, she leaves. Later, I'll just go ahead and cover this scene. Mon Mothma goes to her husband. It was kind of a hard conversation to follow, but I think the main thing I just got from it was her husband is very much, he's not nearly as strong an opinion about, you know, the tyranny of the Empire. He wants to, you know, they're apparently having a dinner that night, and he wanted to invite some very questionable Imperial supporting people to the dinner. And despite Mon Mothma clearly has voiced very vocally that she doesn't like these people, and she says that like they cut off supply routes to certain planets, and people are starving because of them, and so they're on the side of the Empire. They love the Empire. We saw a little bit of that in Obi-Wan Kenobi as well. Like some people that Senator Organa were talking to who were like, "Oh, we don't care. We like being with the Empire because they have all these great benefits and whatnot." And so, similar vibe to that. And you know, she's just very mad that the husband would even want these people at the table, especially while being aware that how much Mon Mothma doesn't like them and doesn't like being around them. So that is an interesting idea, like just to see her personal life, that even that's affected by how messed up the Empire is. And it's funny because when they said she had a husband in this episode, I was like, wait, what? Like, I didn't know she had a husband. She's been around forever, you know, since Return of the Jedi, and I have never once heard a husband mentioned before, which, I mean, stuff in this scene even kind of alludes to maybe that's why, like, maybe since he kind of doesn't really care and maybe even supports the Empire in some way, then he might, like, she might divorce him, or he might even like die in some kind of scenario. But so that was very interesting. Anyway, cut to Andor. You know, some growing trust pains with the new team that he's a part of. They're like, the girl who's like the leader of the team it's interesting because she's been mentioning some like lore and history of the planet and the people who used to live there, and how they were like forced to the south after the Empire came. But like, you know, when Andor's like first meeting the team, their reactions are all the same as the girls, but in different, not all of them. There's one guy who's very on board from the get-go of having like Andor around. He's like, hey man, I think this guy's gonna be good. He's got a good heart in him. So it's interesting to have people with the different perspectives. Like the one other girl, like I don't remember exactly their names. I think the girl's name is Cinda. Forgive me if I butchered it, but she didn't really reveal any specific opinions of like how she felt about having such a last minute entry. She seems a little like maybe slightly annoyed, but she still, she helps Andor. She tries to patch up his wound that he got in the third episode. So clearly she's not that against it. But some of the other team members definitely are. One guy that comes in later that we hadn't seen at first is really against it, but he's like, he's a spy he's in this Imperial suit, spying for the rebels, seeing what information he can gather, pretending to be one of the Imperials. But there was an interesting scene where the first we see of like the team is like the kid that is eventually ends up being for Andor and supporting him is like asleep on the job or on the watch, and one of the guys comes up to him and is like, if you had done that if you were like on Saw Gerrera's team or whatever, they would have put your head on a pike and laughed at it, which is pretty brutal, but probably true. I mean, Saw Gerrera is no joke, but that was the shout out I mentioned earlier. So, like, even that stuff is just, interesting little details here and there. They're a lot better in this episode at having interesting stuff happening while still not being entirely like, oh, that's important to the story. And so I think that was a much better execution this go-around than it was in the last few episodes. Anyway, yeah, they're going over the plan with Andor, telling Andor how their plans are to infiltrate the garrison, how to steal, like, the money. And they mentioned this thing that happens in the sky that they'll use to like cover their tracks once they've stolen a ship that has the money inside of it to leave, because Andor brings up the fact that like there were TIE fighters that they had seen earlier when they were walking through the mountains, and TIE fighters are super fast, so like, and they're going to be stealing the money in this freight ship or whatever, which is obviously a lot slower. He even calls it a suicide mission. But the crew guys mention how there's like this thing that happens in the sky on that planet. They call it like the Eye or something like that. Like there's apparently like some festivities that go down of the people of the specific planet, the people native to it, who have gone down there before to celebrate that event that happens in the sky. I guess the one guy described it like the 50 meteor showers, or like a bunch of meteor showers happening at the same time and then just stopping like that. Like they said, like a thousandth of a second, so that's a little weird that like it would happen in that short of amount of time, but would still cover their tracks somehow if they were able to just slip through whatever event that is in the sky and then just, I guess, I don't know, hyperspace out of there or land in another place on the planet. I would assume hyperspace out of there if the freight ships can hyperspace, which I'm not really sure. That was an interesting thing to learn, but I even enjoyed that detail because we don't really like. Even when we go to different planets in Star Wars, we get information about them specifically. We got information about a lot of them, but like these new ones, like stuff like happens in like space, like the stuff that happens with the stars or different atmospheres or whatnot. That's not discussed a whole lot. So that was a pretty cool detail for that to be added in there. Like, yeah, each different planet might have something that happens in the sky that doesn't happen on any other planet or whatever. So I thought that was pretty cool that they even felt the need to add it in there, and it's serving as a plot device feels maybe feels a little bit like you just added it in there for the purpose of giving them a way of covering their tracks, but at the same time I think it was kind of a cool way to do it. So like if it ends up being like a cool scene, I'll probably give the contrivance a pass. But I think the other thing that happens in the episode is like the woman, the Imperial Security Bureau woman who is concerned about the box, is trying to push her jurisdiction in the other ISB agent guy's sector, and that guy was, handling the Fresic, I think the planet is called Fresic stuff with all the corporate society and what happened in the previous 3 episodes. She's trying to get the box back, essentially. Old leader guy of like the council ends up kind of just making the case to her that it's just not worth it and that she just needs to stick to her own sector and worry about her own problems and let other guys worry about the stuff in their sectors. So not a bunch of stuff going on there. There probably will be a character arc for her, like her trying to do this. She's essentially trying to do the same thing that the whiny, wimpy guy was. She's in the same position that he was, where their superiors are telling them to do one thing or forget about this certain thing that they feel is important and needs to be addressed or needs to be dealt with. So that's essentially a repeat of the previous character, which, I mean, do we need both? I guess we'll know better by the end of the series. So far, it seems like we could have just had one or the other. We didn't really need two of that same type of character. But, I think the Imperial Security Bureau one, though, is more interesting. Since we know the Imperial Security Bureau better from previous, Star Wars Rebels and stuff, and they're actually the Empire, I think that's more interesting than the corporate I almost said corporate society, corporate security stuff happening in the first three. But, that's basically the rundown of the episode. But at the very end, the crew members tell Cassian to memorize all this information, and for them taking on the garrison the next morning. They literally tell him to memorize it all in one night, even though he's still eating. And it was kind of a weird place to end the episode on. It was like, I was expecting some kind of big, at least maybe one last reveal or one last thing to kind of hype it up or the tension or whatever. But no, it was kind of just, okay, memorize the stuff, and then that's the end. So it was an odd ending for the episode. But overall, like I said, I enjoyed this one far better than I enjoyed the previous three. I was worried that, after watching the previous three, is this show just going to be kind of boring and uninteresting, and is nothing's still going to happen, if there's just going to be more filler in this next episode? But that's definitely not what happened. Stuff was moving. We got Mon Mothma, we got more of Luthen and how he operates, and Cassian's on his next mission. So stuff definitely did happen, and I really enjoyed the stuff that happened, which is good. I'm excited that we're actually getting some good content, some good story happening in this show, in a day and age where I feel like so many of the story content is not good. She-Hulk. Sorry, I'm not really sure what happened there. And thank you guys so much for watching my review of Andor Season 1, Episode 4. May the Force be with you, may the Lord be with you, and goodbye. That's also a wrap.